ways to keep your personal data, well, personal. Number one, really having unnecessarily personal information on things that don't need it or aren't required. So I always see this, particularly on social media profiles or CVs that are given to businesses. So people are putting on their social media profiles and CVs things like their nationality, date of birth, sex, address. This is all very personal information and is not typically required in order to process a CV or social media profile. So I would never have this type of information on a CV that I send out, because you don't know A, who's looking at that, and B, what they're going to do with that information, and C, who they're sending it to. So it may not even be the site itself that does something wrong with it, but who ends up looking at it may not have the right processes. The amount of times I've got into workplaces and just seen CVs lying on the floor or lying on a public table as you enter an office is literally unbelievable. Having all this information out there, it doesn't benefit you to put more information out there than is necessary. And it can only lead to your detriment in some way. And this information will be used against you at some point, either today or in the future. So I would just stick to the very basic information on my CV. Your name, your contact information, and that's really it. That's all that's required in terms of personal information on your CV. And the same goes for social media sites, and you can probably even get away with a pseudonym as well. Never give your real date of birth. A lot of sites will ask you for your date of birth, and what they're really trying to ascertain here is, are you over the age of 18? There may be some legal ramifications if you're a child, for example, or they need to put extra measures in. So they need to know whether you're over 18. And this is all they need to know. They don't need to know your actual date of birth. So if they insist on using your date of birth and you can't go beyond the next step in the process, just give a fake date of birth. Sometimes you use your date of birth for security purposes. So it may be a security question that you have on your account. And using your date of birth, your real date of birth, on all these other accounts that you may have actually diminishes that security protocol. Because if those other systems were ever hacked, then someone would be able to use your date of birth and access your account. Always give a pseudonym where possible. So a pseudonym is just a made-up name that you've given yourself. So typically you're always asked for your first and second name in anything that you sign up for online, whether it's an email account, a piece of software, or anything to link with online gaming. Typically there's no real reason why they need to know your real name, but I would always give a pseudonym. And again, you can change this at any time. If it becomes to a point where you actually do need to give your real name, let's say you're on a social media site and people need to identify you, you can update that and change that at any time. But in most cases, a pseudonym is sufficient. Number four is really up for debate. I would avoid being locked into any ecosystem. And this really stops any one company knowing too much about you. So let's say you buy an Apple product, and I get it, there's lots of benefits to being part of one ecosystem. So if you're a part of the Apple ecosystem, it makes sense to have lots of other Apple products to complement those services. You may have a variety of different services, from Apple Music to their smartphones to their watch and all those things. End up collecting lots of information about you, and that may be able to be used against you in some way in the future. My advice, and I appreciate that some people will feel strongly against this one, is just to vary it up. So just simple things like using different browsers on your system. So don't always use Chrome, for example, on your mobile and desktop and have it synced. I typically use things like DuckDuckGo on my mobile, and I'll use Mozilla on my desktop. Sometimes I will use Chrome when I'm doing things like YouTube videos and things like that. Mix it up a little bit, and I'll share some links of some different web browsers you can use. But also I also mix up my services as well. I try to make sure I'm not in any one ecosystem too deeply. That stops any one company having this kind of complete picture about you. get rid of your personal data appropriately. This is more about physical data than online data. So one way that people get hold of your personal information is just by you discarding your personal information inappropriately. So things like with your name and address on, so mail you get through the post, shred it. Anything with your name on, dispose of it appropriately, shred it. Another extreme might be burning it. But the point is make sure there's nothing out there. I've seen heard of lots of individuals who are paid to sift through trash so they can collect information about individuals enough to be able to hack into their accounts or clone their ID, things like that. So anything with your name on it, dispose of it appropriately, or your name and address typically. I would recommend shredding those things. Always be prepared to ask, why do you need that piece of information? I know this is more difficult online where you don't have direct contact with an individual, but always be prepared to ask why you need that piece of personal information. Even if it's a job process that you're going through and they're asking for what you think is very personal information, be prepared to ask, why do you need it? What's the purpose of it? Is this aligned to GDPR? Ask those questions. It might even be a form you receive from school asking about whether your child can be photographed and things like that. This could be when you go into a store and they want to sign you up to some email list. Typically, they'll just ask you for your email as if to say it's part of the process. You need to ask why. Why do you need that information? Just ask that question. What is that information for? Why do you need it? What's the purpose of it? If it's marketing, then you have the right to refuse, and it shouldn't be to your detriment either. So click like if you think those steps were useful, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.